In the far reaches of the galaxy, the Galactic Council sat high above all, a collection of powerful beings who ruled with a sense of superiority that bordered on arrogance. They thrived on the prestige of their positions, viewing themselves as the epitome of civilization, wisdom, and power. They enforced their rule by spreading tales of their grandeur, positioning themselves as the galaxy's elite, the standard by which all others were measured. And among the many beings they ruled over was a species that the Council deemed utterly worthless: the space rats. Small, unassuming, and undeniably scrappy, these creatures lived in the shadow of other species, scraping by on resources others discarded, eking out an existence in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Their appearance didn't help: matted fur, short legs, awkwardly oversized ears, and sharp, crooked teeth. The Council saw them as an evolutionary joke, unworthy of any respect, much less any real concern. For the Council, the space rats represented everything they were not. Where the Council members carried themselves with an air of superiority, these rats were seen as nothing but scavengers. Rumors spread across the stars, fueled by Council propaganda, that the rats were weak, incapable, and cowardly, a species doomed to forever lurk on the fringes, scavenging and surviving only by sheer luck. For the Council, mocking the rats was second nature, a means of bolstering their own image, as though disparaging these creatures reaffirmed their own worth. Amid this galaxy of scorn, one space rat in particular became the epitome of ridicule. This space rat was more peculiar than the others, smaller, with a slight limp and a coat of fur that seemed perpetually disheveled, even by the standard of his species. The Council found amusement in singling him out, even broadcasting his image on certain intergalactic channels as a punchline, a reminder of what the Council considered the bottom of the evolutionary ladder. The rat endured the ridicule in silence, his dark eyes absorbing every sneer, every dismissive comment. He knew better than to respond. He had long learned that reacting would only bring more attention, and with it, more ridicule. But what no one realized, what no one even suspected, was that this seemingly pathetic creature harbored a mind as sharp as any Council strategist. Beneath his scruffy appearance, he possessed a razor-sharp intelligence, honed not by formal education or training, but by years of survival in the harshest conditions the galaxy had to offer. For years he had watched and listened, taking in everything about the Council's technology, their security systems, and their weaknesses. What the Council saw as his meekness was, in reality, a form of strategic camouflage. They never suspected that their joke was studying them, learning to decipher the very codes they used to communicate, understanding the patterns in their surveillance systems, and memorizing their routines. He listened to Council members discuss their politics, their fears, and their threats. Every broadcast, every interaction, every piece of information was stored in his mind, ready to be used when the time was right. The rat knew he would never match the Council in sheer power or resources. But he understood something they never would. He knew how to navigate the galaxy's undercurrents, to blend in, to move unseen. And he had a plan, though he told no one. He spent years quietly gathering scraps of information, like bits of discarded tech and unguarded data fragments, and piecing them together into a bigger picture. In his mind, he mapped out weaknesses the Council didn't even realize they had. For the Council, their security was an afterthought, a network they barely maintained because they believed no one would dare to challenge them. In his quiet, unnoticed way, he prepared, waiting for the right moment. His species was small, and so was he. But he understood that size didn't dictate value, and appearances didn't define capabilities. To the Council, he was invisible, and that invisibility was his greatest weapon. While they strutted and preened, he watched and learned, and slowly but surely, his plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would shake the Council to its core, not by overpowering them, but by exposing their vulnerabilities. He worked patiently, without complaint, honing his knowledge in the shadows, unnoticed by the galaxy that had dismissed him. The Council would never see him coming, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For as long as he could remember, the space rat had lived by instinct, knowing when to stay hidden, how to go unnoticed, and how to adapt to whatever surroundings he found himself in. But now, his survival instincts had grown sharper, driven by a purpose that fueled his every move. Quietly, he had started to test the limits of the Council's systems, feeling out the vulnerabilities he'd identified over years of observation. The more he probed, the more he realized how careless the Council had been in their complacency, never imagining that one of the very beings they despised could ever be a threat. It started with small acts, subtle enough to go undetected. He tapped into unprotected channels, accessing low-level Council data that provided valuable insight into their defense systems. Bit by bit, he built a mental blueprint of their operations, understanding the layout of their main compounds, mapping their security routines, and pinpointing the weaknesses they hadn't even considered. With every breakthrough, his plan evolved, taking shape with a precision that only he could see. Where the Council flaunted their power in broad strokes, he knew that his strength lay in precision. He memorized the Council members' schedules, noting who would be where and when, down to the minute. He analyzed security patrols, discovering patterns and shifts that would allow him to move undetected. Even the technology they used became familiar to him. He learned which systems were integrated, which were isolated, and which ones he could access without detection. He became, in his own way, a master of strategy, quietly crafting a plan that would use the Council's own arrogance against them. But this mission wasn't just about proving the Council wrong, it was about survival for his species. He knew that the Council would continue to belittle and exploit the space rats until something stopped them. If he succeeded, it would change the fate of his people forever, possibly earning them a place in the galaxy as more than mere pests. That thought alone was enough to drive him forward, honing his mind and skills to razor-sharp precision. Each day, each hidden action brought him closer to his goal. Despite the Council's technological advancements, they had underestimated the value of simplicity. While they relied on complex systems and extravagant technology, he knew that sometimes the simplest methods were the most effective. He'd often used discarded scraps to construct decoys, fake signals, and other rudimentary tools that would serve his purpose without drawing attention. With limited resources, he had learned to improvise, turning everyday materials into valuable assets. He knew the time to act was nearing, but he needed one final piece to complete his plan, a way to gain access to the Council's primary communication network. Accessing it was risky, but if he succeeded, he'd have the power to broadcast a message not just to the Council, but to every species under their rule. The plan wasn't without risk, but if he could pull it off, it would force the Council to face the truth they'd been avoiding. They weren't invincible, and their rule wasn't as absolute as they believed. Over the years, he'd grown to understand not just the Council's defenses, but their psychology. He knew they wouldn't suspect someone they deemed inferior to possess the intelligence to outmaneuver them. He knew how to play into their assumptions, using their own biases against them. In his quiet observations, he'd learned that underestimating one's opponent was the greatest weakness of all, and it was a weakness the Council wore like a badge of honor. In his mind, he rehearsed every step of his plan, visualizing each action, each calculated move he would make to infiltrate the Council's most secure facility. It was a bold plan, and one that no one else would even consider attempting. But he was determined. He knew the Council had grown lax, too comfortable in their assumed superiority, and that comfort would be their undoing. Every insult they'd hurled at his species, every slight, every cruel remark had sharpened his resolve. They would never see him coming, and by the time they realized the threat he posed, it would be too late. As he continued his silent preparations, he felt a quiet satisfaction building within him. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving, he was preparing to rewrite his species' destiny. His plan, carefully crafted over years, would not only show the Council what they'd overlooked but would serve as a reminder to the entire galaxy that strength wasn't always visible on the surface. A storm was brewing across the galaxy, one that even the Galactic Council hadn't foreseen. A ruthless alien species, known for their brutal conquests and ability to dismantle defenses with surgical precision, was preparing for an assault. They were relentless, feared by all, and unstoppable once they set their sights on a target. Reports had warned of their approach, yet the Council, in their pride, dismissed them, assuming their empire was invincible. But as the invasion began, that arrogance quickly turned to panic. Council strongholds fell one by one, security systems crumbled, and the impenetrable defenses they prided themselves on proved useless. The alien forces moved with a level of coordination that stunned even the most experienced Council strategists. They knew every weak spot, exploited every vulnerability. Suddenly, the Council's confidence vanished, replaced by a desperation that only grew as their resources dwindled. Their calls for reinforcements were met with silence. Allies who had once been eager to align themselves with the Council now hesitated, unwilling to risk their own safety against such a powerful enemy. And in the chaos, as defenses failed and hope dwindled, a shadow began to move. The Space Rat saw his moment. Where the Council saw disaster, he saw opportunity, and his years of preparation had all led to this. He moved through the shadows, bypassing what little security remained, slipping into restricted zones with the ease of one who knew every inch of the terrain. He began initiating small disruptions, sabotaging supply lines, interfering with communication channels, and creating confusion among the alien invaders. What he lacked in firepower, he made up for in precision. Each calculated move slowed the alien advance, throwing off their rhythm, creating gaps in their formations that even the Council's faltering forces could exploit. One by one, he disrupted their supply routes, rerouted key signals, and disabled critical weapons systems. What had seemed like an unstoppable onslaught began to falter, giving the Council precious time to regroup. The Council was bewildered. Amid the chaos, they noticed the enemy's sudden disarray, the inexplicable delays and missteps. But they had no idea who or what was behind it. Desperation pushed them to investigate, and eventually, they traced the disruptions back to a single source. To their disbelief, it led them straight to the Space Rat, the same creature they'd mocked, belittled, and dismissed as insignificant. Yet here he was, orchestrating a counteroffensive that had eluded even their best strategists. With no other options, the Council was forced to acknowledge the impossible. They approached the Space Rat with a mixture of shock, shame, and a begrudging respect. Even as they asked for his help, they couldn't help but let a hint of their old disdain seep into their voices, struggling to accept that their fate now lay in the hands of the very creature they had treated with such scorn. But the Space Rat held no grudge. He was focused solely on the task at hand. The Council reluctantly granted him limited control over their defenses, and he wasted no time. Ignoring the Council members' lingering looks of doubt, he implemented his plans swiftly, coordinating the remaining forces with a precision they had never seen. He directed troops, set up traps, and orchestrated ambushes that turned the tide of battle. His strategies were unconventional, but they worked, catching the alien invaders off guard and disrupting their previously flawless maneuvers. Each move was a testament to his years of careful preparation, every tactic a demonstration of the intelligence that the Council had failed to recognize. With each passing hour, their resentment faded, replaced by an undeniable realization. They were witnessing a mind far sharper than any they had encountered, a strategist who saw possibilities they never considered. The Space Rat, the one they derided as useless, had become their greatest asset. Despite the Council's reluctance to admit it, they were beginning to see the truth, that they'd been blind, too entrenched in their arrogance to recognize the potential in the beings they deemed beneath them. As the alien forces began to retreat, forced to abandon their assault under the weight of the Space Rat's relentless strategies, the Council could only watch in stunned silence. The Space Rat had taken what they'd dismissed as weakness and turned it into strength, revealing their own flaws in the process. In the aftermath of the battle, as the alien forces withdrew, leaving a battered but victorious Council in their wake, the truth was undeniable. The Council owed their survival to the very creature they'd spent so long mocking. The battlefield lay quiet in the aftermath, the dust settling over what had once been a scene of chaos and fear. The Council members, shaken and visibly humbled, gathered, their pride bruised and their worldview forever altered. They knew, without a doubt, that they owed their survival to the one they'd once scorned. It was a bitter realization for some, a moment of shame for others, but all understood that their own arrogance had nearly cost them everything. With no other choice, the Council turned to the Space Rat, struggling to find words that could adequately convey their newfound respect. They extended an offer, an official position as a strategic advisor, a role with authority and access, an acknowledgement of his brilliance. They tried to frame it as a reward, a gesture of goodwill, an attempt to make amends for their years of mockery. But the space rat saw through their words. He knew they weren't offering him this position out of pure respect. They offered it out of fear, a desperate attempt to retain control in the face of their vulnerability. He looked at the council members, a quiet wisdom in his eyes, and turned them down. Respect wasn't something he could be given, it was something they had to understand. He had proven his worth not through a title but through his actions, and no hollow words could change that. He didn't need a position or their validation. His actions had spoken louder than any title they could bestow upon him. With that, he turned to leave, heading back toward the shadows where he had always been most comfortable. But his departure was far from quiet. News of his triumph had spread across the galaxy, inspiring countless beings who, like him, had been overlooked, underestimated, and cast aside. Messages poured in from distant planets, expressions of gratitude and admiration for the one who had dared to stand up, not with brute force, but with wit, courage, and resilience. In the days that followed, whispers of the space rats' achievements echoed across the stars. The once lowly space rats were now seen in a new light, no longer merely scavengers or bottom dwellers but symbols of resilience and intelligence. Other species, once wary of the Council's rule, took courage from the space rats' defiance, finding within themselves the strength to question, to challenge, and to rise above. The Council, now forced to confront the flaws in their own system, began a gradual shift. They implemented policies to prevent such prejudice, vowing to treat even the humblest species with respect, though it was clear they still struggled with the remnants of their pride. They had been humbled, yes, but their journey toward true change would be long and difficult. Their encounter with the space rat was a wound to their ego, one that would take time to heal. Yet it was also a lesson they could not ignore, a reminder that power without wisdom was a weakness. As for the space rat, he returned to his people a hero, though he carried no airs of victory. He had never sought fame or admiration, he had acted out of necessity, driven by the simple truth that survival sometimes demanded courage. His species welcomed him, not with pomp and ceremony, but with quiet acknowledgement, an understanding shared by those who knew what it meant to live in the shadows. In time, the space rats began to thrive, no longer looked upon as mere scavengers. With the space rats' newfound knowledge and strategic insight, they developed a reputation for their ingenuity, their ability to solve problems that others found insurmountable. Their planet became a hub for those seeking wisdom and advice, a place where overlooked knowledge and unconventional strategies flourished. The Council's empire, though still powerful, would never be the same. The space rat's legacy had shaken its foundation, showing the galaxy that strength didn't come from titles or grand appearances but from resilience, intelligence, and the courage to rise above others' expectations. And for generations to come, beings from all walks of life would remember the story of the ugly space rat who defied the mighty Galactic Council, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest heroes came from the humblest origins. As the space rat looked out over his world, he felt a quiet satisfaction, not for the Council's recognition or the galaxy's praise, but for the knowledge that he had changed something fundamental. He had shown his people, and countless others, that they could stand tall, not because others allowed it but because they had earned it. And in that simple truth lay a victory far greater than any the Council could offer.